In a nation where 60.9% of the youth wake up without a single prospect of employment, the desperation for answers is not just political, it is existential. We are witnessing a landscape where the promise of change is frequently traded for the theater of intimidation. Across the suburbs of Midrand, specifically at Malema Restaurant, a different kind of performance is playing out. It is not a policy debate, nor is it a legislative inquiry. It is an exertion of raw, unchecked power that undermines the dignity of our economic landscape. Julius Malema, a man who built a political fortress on the foundation of liberation, now finds himself at the center of a contradiction that reveals a deep ideological fracture. He speaks of global solidarity, yet he targets the very engine rooms that sustain the livelihoods of thousands. This is not reform. This is not rhetoric. This is accountability, or so the narrative goes. But we must ask, if power changes hands but not structure, has anything really changed? Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. If this story resonates with your sense of justice, do not leave. Like this video, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to South African Dynamics to continue this journey together. The visual architecture of modern political theatre often relies on spectacular disruptions, yet few spectacles carry the institutional gravity of what transpired at the Mall of Africa in Midrand. It was here that the boundaries of constitutional democracy were not merely tested, but overtly breached. Clad in their signature red overalls and crimson berets, a phalanx of the economic freedom fighters descended upon Malema Restaurant, an upscale culinary establishment owned by Tufan Yerabakan. This was not a casual patron visit, nor was it a lawful administrative audit. Led by Julius Malema, this coordinated incursion was framed as a public sector intervention into private enterprise, specifically targeting the employment ratios between South African nationals and foreign African workers. Under the banner of protecting local labor, a highly organized political apparatus transformed a private place of business into a courtroom of their own design. To comprehend the profound anger surrounding this event, one must look past the immediate noise and examine the structural overreach. Julius Malema, occupying a solemn seat as an elected member of parliament, derives his salary and administrative mandate directly from the South African taxpayer. In a constitutional framework, the principle of accountability dictates that a parliamentarian exercises oversight exclusively over state organs, government ministries, and public entities. A member of parliament possesses absolutely no legal authority, no statutory instrument, and no constitutional warrant to act as a rogue labor inspector within the confines of a private corporate entity. Yet, ignoring the clear demarcations of the law, the leadership of the economic freedom fighters chose to bypass the Department of Employment and Labor entirely. They sought to institute an extrajudicial enforcement mechanism, effectively channeling popular economic frustrations into an aggressive display of muscle. This was not an isolated act of spontaneous protest. It was a calculated manifestation of vigilante inspection tactics that directly challenged the rule of law. Eyewitness accounts and subsequent reports detailed how the party's foot soldiers entered commercial spaces prepared for systemic disruption, carrying symbolic threats that created an atmosphere of intense intimidation for ordinary workers and management alike. What makes this particular operation so alarming is its direct defiance of judicial precedent. The economic freedom fighters proceeded with these aggressive tactics despite the existence of 3 separate Supreme Court rulings explicitly prohibiting the party from unlawfully interfering with the operations of private businesses. By channeling raw populism to bypass the judiciary, the movement signaled that its political agenda superseded the highest legal authorities of the Republic. Herein lies the deployment of a highly sophisticated political tool, the mask. For years, Julius Malema has worn the mask of the ultimate protector of the marginalized, projecting an image of a disciplined revolutionary fighting for economic justice and systemic equality. Yet as the red berets crowded the entrance of Malema Restaurant, that carefully constructed image began to fracture, revealing a raw desire for political dominance. The anger felt by observers is rooted in this exact deception. Taxpayer resources meant to uphold the dignity of democratic governance were instead weaponized to fuel a populist campaign that offers no sustainable macroeconomic solutions to the broader landscape. It was a performance designed for digital cameras and media headlines, a calculated maneuver to exploit local anxieties for electoral gain. But what happens when this carefully choreographed show of force meets absolute resistance at the threshold of private property? The true nature of this political friction became undeniably clear the moment the cameras began to roll and the verbal confrontation turned into something far more dangerous. The confrontation at the threshold of Cream Restaurant escalated from a procedural disagreement into a sharp geopolitical flashpoint. When the establishment's management quietly but firmly refused to grant an official audience to an unsanctioned political delegation, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Julius Malema did not reach for legal frameworks or parliamentary regulations. Instead, he weaponized racial rhetoric, openly accusing the establishment of displaying what he termed white arrogance. This strategic deployment of historical trauma was designed to deflect from his lack of statutory authority. When met with the simple demand to produce an official confirmation of an appointment, the commander-in-chief of the economic freedom fighters threatened to mobilize larger crowds to shut down the enterprise. He issued a chilling ultimatum declaring that the management was placing their entire business at immediate risk. This was a raw assertion of political dominance over private sovereignty, a theatrical demonstration that sought to bypass the modern constitution entirely. This volatile standoff exposed a profound crisis within the architecture of the state, forcing formal institutions to issue unprecedented public rebukes. The Department of Employment and Labour, alongside the highest offices of Parliament, were compelled to intervene to restore institutional order. Employment and Labour Minister Julius Malema issued a definitive statement clarifying that while public representatives possess oversight powers, they hold absolutely no mandate to conduct independent inspections or unilaterally enforce compliance within private corporations. Similarly, Parliament spokesperson Moloto Motopo reiterated that the constitutional duties of public representatives are explicitly confined to state organs, rendering any extrajudicial inspection of private properties a direct violation of constitutional boundaries. These official statements stripped the economic freedom fighters of their revolutionary legitimacy, exposing their actions as a dangerous overreach. Before we reveal the next chapter, which is perhaps the most powerful assertion of accountability you will ever hear, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If this channel has moved you, if these stories are touching something deep in your spirit, then consider becoming a member. Not for exclusive content or perks, but because supporting this channel is directly supporting narratives that mainstream media refuses to tell. Every membership is a vote for South African Dynamics' mission. Every member becomes a co-creator of the revolution we are documenting. Join us. Stand with the principle that African wealth belongs to Africa. The collision at the doors of Cream Restaurant was a classic manifestation of justice versus power. Julius Malema claimed to be marching in the name of economic justice for the marginalized, yet his execution relied entirely on coercive power. By marching foot soldiers into a private commercial entity, the economic freedom fighters attempted to replace constitutional due process with street-level intimidation. For the analytical observer, this performance represents a severe subversion of democratic norms. It demonstrates a chilling willingness to ignore the judiciary and abuse public titles for party political gains. When an elected official can threaten a law-abiding business owner with economic ruin simply because the state's formal processes move too slowly, the fundamental stability of the republic is brought into question. This is not law. This is not justice. This is enforcement. It is an attempt to govern through fear rather than through the established structures of the Constitution. The media coverage that followed further illuminated the deep political fractures within the nation. Progressive commentators attempted to frame the inspections as a bold stance against corporate exploitation, while legal analysts and international observers viewed it as a dangerous slide toward lawlessness. For the global investing community, particularly observers in the United States who value predictable legal frameworks, this incident sent shockwaves through the market. It raised an unsettling question about the ultimate safety of private capital in a landscape where political actors can arbitrarily disrupt operations without consequence. The state's inability to immediately halt this extrajudicial behavior highlighted the vulnerability of the current administration. This lawless spectacle was not merely a localized event or a temporary media stunt. It exposed a much deeper systemic calculation designed to exploit a nation fracturing under the weight of catastrophic poverty. The immediate economic fallout of this systemic failure extends far beyond the commercial tables of Midrand, casting a long, dark shadow over the everyday lives of ordinary citizens. According to the official datasets released by Statistics South Africa for the opening quarter of 2026, the expanded unemployment rate has escalated to a catastrophic 43.1%. For the youth, the situation is even more tragic, with 60.9% of young citizens completely locked out of the formal economy. These are not merely abstract figures on an analyst's spreadsheet. They represent a devastating human cost. Millions of citizens are forced to queue indefinitely for inadequate social grants, their stomachs empty, and their economic agency stripped away. The deep sense of regret within the population stems from the realization that entry-level positions in the hospitality, logistics, and agricultural sectors should be the critical foundation for grassroots capital accumulation. Honest manual labor in a restaurant kitchen or on a commercial farm is supposed to be the first stepping stone toward true financial independence. The modest savings generated from these entry-level roles are what allow an ordinary individual to purchase a specialized tiling machine, acquire a small commercial vehicle for local contracting, or buy a laptop to pursue virtual bookkeeping courses. This is how generationally disadvantaged families build tangible capital from nothing. Yet, this path is continuously blocked by political instability. The tragic irony is sharpened when one remembers the historical exploitation of the poor, such as the VBS mutual bank corruption scandal in Limpopo, where the life savings of vulnerable elderly folk were systematically plundered by elite political networks. This structural theft stands in stark contrast to the revolutionary rhetoric spat from public platforms, highlighting a profound divergence between ideological promises and economic reality. It is within this broader domestic collapse that the Malema Restaurant Scandal must be critically evaluated. The leader of the economic freedom fighters operates with a deeply conflicted strategy, speaking with a classic forked tongue to secure electoral favor from opposing factions. On one hand, he insists that local citizens must be prioritized for employment. On the other hand, he loudly commands that business owners must never cease the employment of foreign nationals from Zimbabwe or Lesotho. This glaring Malema Immigration Contradiction leaves the private sector completely paralyzed and the local workforce deeply divided. By defending the preservation of low-skilled foreign labor while simultaneously pretending to champion the local unemployed, his platform avoids offering any real structural reforms. This brings us to a fundamental crossroad in the broader South Africa crisis. If wealth grows but inequality deepens, who is development really for? Pause for a moment and share with us in the comments where you are watching this video from. Is it from the Americas, Africa, or Europe-South African dynamics? Would like to express our deepest gratitude to everyone, and we send you a heartfelt wish. May freedom, strength, and dignity walk beside you on the road ahead. This global gathering of analytical minds proves that the struggle for transparent governance transcends geographic boundaries. The internal fragmentation caused by these contradictory policies is rapidly weakening the domestic stability of the Republic. But as this internal friction threatens to tear the social fabric apart, the international implications are becoming impossible to ignore, forcing global superpowers to re-evaluate their positions. The international community does not view the internal friction of South Africa in isolation. Beyond the borders of the Republic, continental bodies such as the African Union and the Southern African Development Community watch these developments with growing apprehension. For these major institutions, the threat of structural destabilization is not a distant worry but an immediate economic risk. The volatile rhetoric driving these extrajudicial actions directly triggers warnings of renewed xenophobia and Afrophobia, threatening to completely isolate the nation from its continental allies. On the global stage, diplomatic missions are forced to balance official engagement with deep concern over the erosion of domestic legal standards. The historical tension between accountability and impunity is no longer just a domestic debate. It has transformed into an international assessment of whether the nation remains a reliable anchor for continental development. For the United States and Western trading partners who monitor the African continent through the precise lens of institutional stability, the stakes are exceptionally high. International investors require predictable legal frameworks to commit long-term capital, especially ahead of significant multilateral trade negotiations scheduled for 2026. The spectacle of political figures disrupting private commerce sends a chilling message to global markets. The reality is undeniable. Arbitrary interventions erode market confidence, weaken the sovereign credit profile, and severely destabilize foreign direct investment. Global analysts increasingly categorize the EFF Vigilante Inspections as a direct challenge to the constitutional predictability that once distinguished the Republic as a premier destination for international trade. This is where the narrative shifts from a local incident to a serious geopolitical warning, heavily documented across international media platforms carrying the Malema Latest news. Western policymakers and members of the African diaspora, over 50 years old, observe these developments with a profound understanding of historical precedents. They recognize that when institutional guardrails are systematically bypassed, the entire democratic project faces an existential threat. The role of external diplomacy is not to interfere in domestic choices, but to demand absolute adherence to the very legal principles that formed the foundation of the post-apartheid state. The international framework cannot tolerate a system where private contracts are subject to the whims of populist mobilizations. Yet as the international community recalculates its diplomatic alignments and economic commitments, the ultimate resolution remains entirely within the nation. The critical question shifts from how the world responds to how the architecture of the Republic will salvage its own future from the brink of populist decay. The path forward requires a stark and uncompromising evaluation of ideological honesty. For years, Julius Malema has projected the grand, unifying vision of Pan-Africanism, a borderless, integrated continent where solidarity supersedes historical divisions. Yet the reality unfolding on the streets of Midrand tells a vastly different story. When faced with the immense electoral pressure of a deeply impoverished local constituency, this grand ideology is swiftly abandoned. Instead, the genuine economic despair of the vulnerable is weaponized to hunt down low-wage foreign workers in private restaurants, all to secure short-term political relevance. This contradiction reveals a painful truth. The current populist machinery relies entirely on the very fragmentation and division it claims to oppose. However, the future of the Republic does not belong to those who thrive in manufactured chaos. True economic sovereignty and national security can never be achieved through extrajudicial raids or the systemic harassment of lawful enterprises. The authentic roadmap to prosperity is built upon a much stronger foundation, the quiet, dignified accumulation of skills, the enhancement of grassroots education, and the absolute protection of constitutional property rights. When a young citizen leverages an entry-level hospitality job to fund a digital certification, Or when a manual laborer saves enough capital to purchase their first piece of commercial equipment, they are engaging in the real revolution. This is the legitimate creation of wealth that builds a nation and outlasts any political slogan. Populism operates much like the shadow. It appears massive, overwhelming, and terrifying when the environment is clouded by fear, but it inevitably shrinks and vanishes the moment the light of truth and objective accountability is cast upon it. The citizens of South Africa are beginning to turn on that light. There is a growing undeniable pride among the electorate, a recognition that genuine dignity is not handed down from a political stage. It is forged through hard work and protected by an unwavering commitment to the rule of law. What you have witnessed today is not a conclusion, but an opening. If this message of accountability and dignity has moved you, subscribe to South African Dynamics. Do not let this moment pass into silence. Subscribe now and stand ready for the next chapter that is already waiting to be written. The final verdict on this political spectacle will not be delivered by a court of law, nor by the ruling politicians fighting for their own survival. It rests entirely in the hands of the citizens who must decide what kind of nation they are willing to inherit. The exposure of the absolute contradictions defining the economic freedom fighters leaves the Republic at a profound turning point in 2026. What began as a loud crusade for the marginalized has dissolved into a calculated display of political opportunism, forever marked by the notorious Malema Restaurant Scandal. When a political movement chooses to trade structural reform for the instant gratification of street-level intimidation, it compromises the very sovereignty it claims to protect. The Republic cannot secure its socio-economic future on a foundation of shifting promises and unlawful disruptions. True progress demands that the nation rejects the lawless overreach of the EFF Vigilante Inspections and instead embraces the predictable, stable rule of constitutional law. The choice now facing the people of South Africa is stark a choice between the hollow comfort of populist drama and the enduring strength of institutional accountability. For the global community, and particularly for the millions within the African diaspora observing from the United States, this moment is a critical case study in the struggle between accountability and impunity. The legacy of a nation is not written by those who weaponize economic pain for electoral gain, nor is it defined by the chaos of the Malema Restaurant Scandal. It is forged by the resilience of everyday citizens who refuse to let their democratic institutions be hollowed out from within. As the nation confronts the realities of the 2026 landscape, the final question remains. Will the people continue to allow the shadow of populism to dictate the terms of their freedom? Or will they demand a leadership that honors the constitutional dignity of the Republic?